Hello, brothers and sisters, and welcome back to an all-new Sermons in the Park. As always, I am your Reverend Jamie McCaskill. I want to take this time, like I do each and every week, to say thank you for joining me here. It's always great and wonderful to have you tune in and watch me or listen, wherever that may be, whether it be BitChute, Rumble, YouTube, or even over here on the podcast. Wherever you listen, in places like Amazon, Spotify, iHeartRadio, wherever you're tuning in, I just want to make sure to say thank you. And then I also want to make sure to tell you Happy New Year, Happy 2023. 2022 is now over. We're into a new year. We're into 2023 now. So yeah, Happy New Year. You might have noticed, especially if you tune in on the podcast, we did not have a Friday, Saturday episode of the podcast. It was due to exactly as I warned you guys. With my new job, there will be times when I'm not able to upload as frequently as I want to. It wasn't something that I planned or anything like that. It just kind of happened. Okay, with my new job, there will be times where that will happen, but don't worry. The Sunday sermon will always be here. I will always make time to record these. This is the more important part of it, is delivering this sermon to you each and every Sunday. It is the reason I do this, and it will continue to be the reason I do this. So, with that out of the way, let's bow our heads and thank our Heavenly Father for all the gifts that He's given us. Thank Him especially for a new year. And yeah, let's bow our heads. Heavenly Father, we come to you like we do each and every week here on Sermons in the Park, and how we should do each and every day of our lives, just to say thank you. You give us so very much. You give us air to breathe, water to drink, food to quench our thirst and our hunger. It's all because of you, Father. You give us the taste buds to enjoy the food. You give us the nerve endings to help us feel things, to make sure that we don't hurt ourselves when we're doing our jobs. You give us energy to get out of bed, to go and do our jobs, just to go throughout our day. If it wasn't for you, Father, we wouldn't have these things. We wouldn't be able to get up and go. There are so many people who go throughout their lives who think that they do it all on their own, and I pity them. I pity somebody who thinks that it's all them, that they're the reason they have all the things they have, when it's because of you. And we thank you. We thank you for a new year. We thank you for us making it through 2022, because without you, we would never have made it. This world has gotten so ungodly, Father, and we're sorry that we haven't done more to prevent that. We know that you put us here to commune with you and have a relationship with you, and so many of us have failed at it, and we ask you for forgiveness for that. And we just want to do more than we want to do more to help you. Put the words in our mouths. Give us the push to deliver those words. Give us the courage to say no when we see something ungodly taking place. Give us the words that we need to defend you, Father, because we know that it's in the Bible. We know they're there, but give us the extra push that we need. And we ask this in your name of your Son, Jesus, who came so long ago to die so that we can have a closer relationship with you. And we ask all this in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. So, as you know, if you've been tuning in, we've been doing our book by book, chapter by chapter, verse by verse review of the book of Genesis. And this week we're up to chapter 16. So, if you're new, this is a good chance to pause, go back on wherever you view or listen, and get caught up. Because last week we were reviewing chapter 15, okay? And we ended when God was giving Abram the information about the future life of his descendants. How how they will go to Egypt, how they will be brought out of Egypt, and how they will conquer the Canaanites. And we saw 10 people listed there. And this week we will be continuing on with the life of Abram, who will eventually become Abraham, right? So let us go ahead and read. We're going to read Genesis chapter 16. We're going to read the entire chapter, which is a short one this week. It's just 15 verses. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, bare him no children. And she had a handmaid, an Egyptian, whose name was Hagar. And Sarai said unto Abram, Behold, now the Lord hath restrained me from bearing. I pray thee, go in unto my maid. It may be that I may obtain children by her. And Abram hearkened to the voice of Sarai. And Sarai, Abram's wife, told Hagar, her maid, the Egyptian, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, and gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife. And he went in unto Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was despised in her eyes. And Sarai said unto Abram, My wrong be upon thee. I have given my maid into thy bosom. And when she saw that she had conceived, I was despised in her eyes. The Lord judge between me and thee. But Abram said unto Sarai, Behold, thy maid is in thy hand. Do to her as it pleaseth thee. And when Sarai dealt hardly with her, she fled from her face. And the angel of the Lord found her by the fountain of water in the wilderness, by the fountain in the way of Shur. And he said, Hagar, Sarai's maid, whence comest thou, and whither wilt thou go? And she said, I flee from the face of my mistress Sarai. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, Return to thy mistress, and submit thyself under her hands. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, I will multiply thy seed exceedingly, that it shall not be numbered for multitude. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, Behold, thou art with child, and shalt bear a son, and shalt call his name Ishmael, because the Lord hath heard thy affliction. And he will be a wild man. His hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him. And he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. And she called the name of the Lord that spake unto her, Thou God seest me. For she said, Have I also here looked after him that seeth me? Wherefore the well was called Berlai-roi. Behold, it is between Kadesh and Bered. And Hagar bare Abram a son, and Abram called his son's name, which Hagar bare, Ishmael. And Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bare Ishmael to Abram. Now, what do we usually do? We go back and we look at the first verse that we read, and then we break that down. So let's go back to verse 1, and we'll reread that, and then we'll talk about it. So, verse 1. Now Sarai, Abram's wife, bare him no children, and she had a handmaid, an Egyptian, which name was Hagar. Now notice that it starts off with, Now Sarai, Abram's wife, bare him no children. Remember, to all rights, Sarai was a barren woman. So, of course, Abram was childless. We were told this, right, back in Genesis chapter 11, verse 30. Let's go look at that real quick. But Sarai was barren. She had no children. But you see, Abram knew. He knew that God had promised him children. And so far, he doesn't have any. So he sees no children. This must have been one big trial for him as far as his faith. He had been married to Sarai for a long, long, long time. She was his wife. She was his wife when he left Chaldees. We were never told how long they had been married before they left Ur of the Chaldees. They had lived for some time in Haran, and according to the Jewish scholars, that had been for at least 5 years. And we know, right, that they lived in Canaan for 10 years. Anyway, we read here in verse 1 that Sarai, she had this handmaid, and she was an Egyptian woman, and her name was Hagar. Now, don't be confused. I have no doubt that Sarai had many slave women. But Hagar, she seemed to be her number one, the one that she trusted more than any others. Someone who probably was entrusted to handle her family affairs. Now, could she have been the daughter of one of those Egyptians that lived in Abram's house? Of course. Maybe she was born into service. We'll never know. But it is possible. Am I right? You know, Eliezer was the son of a Syrian of Damascus, and he was born there. Or who knows? Maybe she was one of the maidservants that Pharaoh even gave to him. This is just one of them situations that, as I tell you many, many, many times, the Bible doesn't give us an answer, and that's because it's not important. So, let's continue. Verse 2. And Sarai said unto Abram, Behold now, the Lord hath restrained me from bearing. I pray thee, go in unto my maid. It may be that I may obtain children by her. And Abram hearkened unto the voice of Sarai. Sarai was thinking that there was no chance that she was ever going to have any children. She did not have a strong faith, especially one as strong as Abraham's was, or Abram's, right? So she goes to Abram and she proposes that, hey, take another wife. Take Hagar. Because Hagar's children because Hagar belongs to Sarai, Hagar's children would be her property as well. Paul's right there. Do either one of them ask the Lord what they should do? Do they seek counsel with the Lord? No. It doesn't say that they prayed. It doesn't say that they asked God what he thought of it. No. In their unbelief, they forgot to do what we all should do. They forgot to ask God. And their unbelief works, right? But this is a bad example here. And, of course, it's the source of many future problems, isn't it? You see, Sarai, she tells Abram, go in unto my maid. It may be that I may obtain children by her. Now, this is one of those cases where it was okay with the humans, right? People didn't care. But it's not okay with God. This is one of those legal customs that was around at the time. You can find it in many marriage contracts from that time period. I'm sure that many of us understand how she lost her hope. It had been over 10 years since God had made that original promise of an heir. So Abram and Sarai, they did what they thought was best. They took matters into their own hands. Paul uses this as an example of work of the flesh. If you want to read about that, it's in Galatians chapter 4. He shows it as a contrast to the Spirit of God. Think about it. This scheme here that Sarai cooks up, it's caused nothing but trouble. First off, the child that was born, it wasn't Sarai's child. I mean, sure, she had lost faith, and you could say that she thought she was helping God out. But come on. When has God ever needed our help to do something? Anytime anyone ever gets ahead of God and they start to think that they figured out the details, they wind up with a huge mess on their hands. In this case here, no exception. Abram, he mixed his blood with an Egyptian. That was not pleasing to God. Think about it this way. Egypt, they're a type of the world, okay? Abram's seed was for God. You cannot mix faith with worldly things. Just look at what happens with the union between Hagar and Abraham. It's nothing but worldly. It was not part of God's plan, and any child that came from that union, that's of the flesh. Think about that poor maid. She was caught in a trap that she was not part of. And Abram, did he honestly have to do it? No. Abram could have said no, but instead, he did what his wife told him to do. He followed in this plan. And this, he's responsible for this. He's just as responsible as Sarai is here. Let's go to verse 3 now. And Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar her maid the Egyptian, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, and gave her to her husband Abram to be his wife. Notice that it says Sarai gave her to her husband. Like I said, it's been 10 years. It even says so here. And she has not had any children. So she resorted to this old, culturally approved custom of the day, where a barren wife could have a child through her maidservant. Like I said, it was culturally approved, not God approved. Okay? By taking part in this, Abram is ignoring what God had told him earlier. God told him he could not appoint an heir, right? Remember? And Abram, he submitted to Sarai's insistence, and this of course leads to the birth of Ishmael. We've already talked about him a little bit in one of my podcast exclusives. Now, the only thing I can think that I need to add here is that we should look at how worldly Abram is acting here. Yes, it's been 10 years. But God made a promise. And Abram, he doesn't think about that. He allows his flesh to rule him here. Right? So let's go to verse 4. And he went in unto Hagar, and she conceived. And when she saw that she had conceived, her mistress was despised in her eyes. Now, the verse opens up here, right? It says, and he went in unto Hagar, and she conceived. So, after the wedding ceremony, all of those formalities are out of the way, Abram enjoyed his wife. And notice that the way this verse makes it sound, she immediately became pregnant. And when she knew that she was pregnant, it says that her mistress was despised in her eyes. She felt that she was above her now. She started to treat her mistress like she's the inferior. She treated her with contempt, with reproach for her being barren. Just like how Peninnah did Hannah, right? In 1 Samuel 1 verse 6. Let's take a look at that real quick. As soon as I can find a place to sit there. Sorry, this thing is doing just like it does all the other times. 1 Samuel chapter 1 verse 6 reads, And her adversary also provoked her sore, for it make her fret, because the Lord had shut up her womb. Now, think of how ungrateful she was. She was only in this state, right, because Sarai had given her to Abram as a wife. Hagar, she suddenly felt like she was more important. Her affair with Abram had led to her becoming pregnant. She felt anger. She felt jealousy for Sarai. The Bible makes it clear that these types of relationships never work out. In Genesis, after God made Adam and Eve, he said that the two shall become one flesh. One, two and one. Marriage between more than two people, it's not compatible with God's plan. And God's plan is the plan. And he made it at the beginning. Jealousy between two women reigned in Abram's house here. All right, verse 5 now. And Sarai said unto Abram, My wrong be upon thee. I have given my maid into thy bosom, and when she saw that she had conceived, I was despised in her eyes. The Lord judge between me and thee. Sarai says to her husband, Wrong be upon thee. I was despised. She never even thought that something like this would happen. Instead of owning up to her mistakes, because remember, this was her idea. Instead of owning up to the fact that it was her idea, she blames Abram for it. She demands judgment to rectify the broken relationship between her and Hagar, her servant. I mean, seriously. She's the one that gave her maid to him. And here she is saying, My wrong be upon thee. This is not a wise statement, is it? Such pride, such anger. Just because you are loud and forward when you appeal to God does not make you the right one. Rash and bold imprecations speak guilt and bad cause. But as we see in the next verse, he puts all the responsibility back in her hands. He gives her the freedom to do what she wanted. He tells her, Your mind is in your power. I guess when we look at it, she does admit that she was wrong. But just like others who do wrong, she does not want to take the blame for it. She tries to shift it to Abram. If you remember when we were reviewing Judges, I talked about how important it was for Hebrew women to have children. They thought that it was a fate worse than death to not have children. So to Sarai, it was a disgrace on her. She would have been looked down on. Having children was seen as a blessing from God, and not having them was considered a curse. It was not evident in the Bible if this was Hagar feeling, maybe in her mind, Hagar was trying to take Sarai's place with Abram here. Here in verse 5, Sarai seems to be asking God to decide who is to blame, whether it was her fault or whether it was Abram's fault. But let's continue on. Let's look at verse 6 real quick. But Abram said unto Sarai, Behold, thy maid is in thy hand. Do to her as it pleaseth thee. And when Sarai dealt hardly with her, she fled from her face. You see, the unhappy marriage that Abram now finds himself in with Hagar, this will soon lead to great mischief. One thing that we can learn from this is that when we step out of our duty, we have no one else to think for the guilt, right? For the grief that follows, except for ourselves. In a case like this, passionate people will often quarrel with other people for things that they have to bear the blame for. I think that Hagar here, she forgot that she was the one that provoked this, right? She was the one that despised her mistress. The Bible tells us this. You see, if you're suffering from something, if you are suffering for something that you did, you need to bear it. And you need to bear it patiently. This is what we read in 1 Peter chapter 2, verse 20. For what glory is it when ye be buffeted for your faults? Ye shall take it patiently. But if, when you do well and suffer for it, ye take it patiently, this is acceptable with God. Notice what we read here in verse 6. But Abram said unto Sarai. I'm sure that he did it in a very gentle way when he said, Behold, thy maid is in thine hands. This shows us that even though Hagar was Abram's second wife, he still considers Hagar to be Sarai's maid. And as such, she's subject to her. So he allows his wife to exercise her authority over her. He still felt love and affection for Sarai. She's his first and lawful wife. He's showing the same respect for her that he always did. He supports her in her honor and her dignity, and he tells her, Do to her as it pleaseth thee. I saw where some think that Abram would have allowed her to kill her, but I don't think that he would. He did not give her the liberty to take away her life. He did not even say that he would allow her to be cruel. No, he was allowing her to deal with her, just like any other mistress would have been legally allowed to do to their servants. Now, yes, maybe Abram, in his complacency to Sarai, he gave her too large of a commission, and he left too much in her power, right? I also think that he may have done better by listening to both sides of the story and then judging what to do. Using his own authority. I mean, if she only been, Sarai's maid and not his wife, it would have been less offensive. However, for the sake of peace, he allowed her to do whatever she needed to do. We see him just backing away. Like I said, Hagar was her maid, right? So her punishing her in some way for the attitude that she presented, and whatever this punishment was, whatever happened, it scared Hagar so badly that she ran away in fear. All right, let's go to verse 7 now. And the angel of the Lord found her by a fountain of water in the wilderness, by the fountain in the way of Shur. Look who comes to her here. Do you notice the name? Do you notice what this angel is called? It says the angel of the Lord. The angel of the Lord, this special individual, speaks like he is distinct from Yahweh. But he also speaks in the first person as well. Like, he's Yahweh himself. And Hagar, she recognizes that this is an angel. She'd seen God. Now, we've spoken of this before, especially when we were reviewing Judges. But many have seen him and came to the same conclusion. Have you noticed that the angel of the Lord does not appear after the birth of Christ? I believe, as many do, that he is Jesus before he took human form. Notice where Hagar was. It says that she was beside the fountain on the way to Shur. Now, Shur is it's south of Palestine, right? And it's also east of Egypt. This lets us know that Hagar was trying to return home to Egypt. And this angel is identified by different names throughout the Old Testament as the angel of the Lord, or the angel of God in Genesis chapter 21, verse 17. If you want, we can take a look at that real quick. And God heard the voice of the lad, and the angel of God called to Hagar out of the heaven, and said unto her, What aileth thee, Hagar? Fear not, for God hath heard the voice of the lad where he is. You see, he's also called the angel. Sorry, let me set this down. He's also called the angel of his presence in Isaiah chapter 63, verse 9. In all their affliction he was afflicted, and the angel of his presence saved them. In his love and in his pity he redeemed them, and he bare them and carried them all the days of old. He's also called the messenger of the covenant in Malachi chapter 3, verse 1. Behold, I will send my messenger, and he shall prepare the way before me, and the Lord, whom ye seek, shall suddenly come to his temple, even the messenger of the covenant, whom ye delight in. Behold, he shall come, saith the Lord of the hosts. Now, if we take a closer look at the context of his appearance here, this reveals that he's more than just another angel. He is God. Like I said, I believe that this angel is a pre-incarnate appearance of Jesus. He's visible. He's a bodily manifestation of God the Son before his birth. The fact that he's not merely just another angel is evident, especially in those appearances where he's called God. This was recognized by Hagar later on in verse 13. Now, Abraham in verse 14, chapter 22, verse 14. Let's take a look. And Abram called the name of the place Jehovah-Jireh, as it is said to this day, in the mount of the Lord it shall be seen. Moses in Exodus chapter 3, verse 14. And God said unto Moses, I am that I am. And he said, Thus shalt thou say unto the children of Israel, I am, hath sent me unto you. Okay? Gideon in Judges chapter 6, verse 22. And when Gideon perceived that he was an angel of the Lord, Gideon said, Alas, O Lord God, for because I have seen an angel of the Lord face to face. And Manoah, okay, in Judges chapter 13, verses 18 and 22. And the angel of the Lord said unto him, Why askest thou thus after my name, seeking it as secret? Right? And then verse 22, and Manoah said unto his wife, We shall surely die, because we have seen God. When it is used of men, it is translated the Lord's messenger. Haggai 1:13. Then spake Haggai the Lord's messenger in the Lord's message unto the people, saying, I am with you, saith the Lord. Another reason that I think that this is Jesus is because the angel of the Lord no longer appears to men today. Because you see, God has commissioned us, you and me, Christians, to be his messengers to the world. All right, verse 8 now. And he said, Hagar, Sarai's maid, whence comest thou, and whither wilt thou go? And she said, I flee from the face of my mistress Sarai. Notice that he calls her by her name. The verse starts out, and he said, Hagar, Sarai's maid. I bet that surprised her. Not only does he call her by her name, he describes her character and her condition, checking her pride, putting her mind back to her duty to her mistress. This suggests to her that she shouldn't be there. She should be back there with her mistress. You see, she had fled to a deserted place. She seems to have known that there was water here, and she must have stopped there for a drink. She had run from the home that she had, and she was pregnant, and she had nowhere to go. Not only that, but the man who was the father of her child had turned his irate wife loose on her. The only other person that she had as a benefactor was Sarai. And she had treated her poorly, hadn't she? She was punished. She was punished because how she treated her boss. She probably thought, what can I do? Where can I go? And here she was, feeling sorry for herself, having a party, a pity party for a party of one. And suddenly, here this angel appears to her. The word that's often translated as angel can also be translated as prophet, or priest, or teacher, also ambassador, or king, or even messenger. But notice, this does not say an angel. No. It says the angel. The definitive article. God saw what was going on, and so he sent her some help. I like how the angel acts like he does not know. Yeah, you see it a lot with God, don't you? Especially here in Genesis, you go back to Adam and Eve. When he asked Cain, where's your brother? Because he already knew. We see God ask her here, where did you come from? Where are you going? It's here in this verse that we see her admit that Sarai was her mistress for the first time since she got pregnant. All right, verse 9. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, Return to thy mistress, submit thyself under her hands. So the angel of the Lord, he found Hagar. He found her there beside this fountain, this well, which we know because of tradition would be on the side of a caravan road. And it would have been in the midst of Shur, which is a sandy desert, like I said, on the west of Arabia. About 150 miles between Palestine and Egypt. Her going in that direction tells us that she was probably intending to return home to her family in Egypt. Now think about it. She's a woman. She's alone. And the only thing that would make someone like her brave the dangers of the road alone was her pride, her passion, her sullen obstinacy. She could have died if that angel had not called her to reflect on her duties. And he tells her, return to thy mistress, submit thyself. The verb that is used here is the same one that's used to describe Sarah's conduct towards her. He's telling her to meekly resign herself to the ungracious and oppressive treatment of her mistress. It says, under her hands. Notice that what the angel says to her acts like the relationship between Sarai and her is still intact. Rebelling and leaving was not the solution to the problem. So, I'm going to try to use some Louisiana speech here and make this and try to tell you what the angel's saying. Go back there and apologize for what you did. Amen. So, let's look at verse 10 now. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, I will multiply thy seed exceedingly, that it shall not be numbered for multitude. The angel tells her, I will multiply thy seed exceedingly. This is interesting, isn't it? She may have been a servant, but she will be the mother of many. This makes Abram the father of two different groups of innumerable descendants. And if you want to know more about that, go over to my podcast, and I did a whole video on, or a whole podcast episode on that particular subject. Let's go to verse 11 now. And the angel of the Lord said unto her, Behold, thou art with child, and shalt bear a son, and shalt call his name Ishmael, because the Lord hath heard thy affliction. So he tells her to name her child Ishmael. And Ishmael means God hears. It was meant to be a reminder to Hagar that God intervened in her life in this special way. Oh, that reminds me. This is the first time in the Old Testament that we see the angel of the Lord appearing, right? Now, Ishmael is the oldest son of Abram through Hagar. Ishmael was later guilty of taunting his half-brother Isaac. And of course we know that he and Hagar are then expelled by Abraham and Sarah's insistence. Or I should say, at Sarah's insistence. God, he promises that Ishmael would be a wild man, and that his life was spared by God. Ishmael becomes the forefather of Arabs when he marries an Egyptian, and he becomes the father of 12 princes. When you honestly think about this whole situation, Hagar was innocent. Here in this story, we see that she finds out that she will have a boy, and she will name him Ishmael, and that she would have a multitude of descendants. And Ishmael's name means, as I said, God hears. Remember, because God heard Hagar's cries. Verse 12. And he will be a wild man, his hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him. And he shall dwell in the presence of his brethren. reread that with me. And he will be a wild man. His hands will be against every man, and every man's hand against him. And he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. This verse tells us that Ishmael will be a wild man, and that he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. Now, the words that are translated here, if you were to look at the Hebrew words, actually mean in defiance or disregard of. Take a look at Genesis chapter 25, verse 18. I still have this page blocked. And they dwelt from Havilah upon Shur, that is before Egypt, and thou shalt, as thou goest towards Assyria, and he died in the presence of all his brethren. Also, let's look at Deuteronomy chapter 21, verse 16. Now that one I'll have to use the phone. Deuteronomy chapter 21, verse 16. Then it shall be, when he maketh his sons to inherit that which he hath, that he may not make the son of the beloved firstborn before the son of the hated, which is indeed the firstborn. Now, as you can see, looking at the language and the context, this tells us that this means hostility on his part and the part of his descendants towards his brethren. And that means Isaac and his descendants, and even among his own people. The onagers, or wild donkeys, best described the nature of Ishmael and his descendants. They're aggressive. They're independent. This right here, brothers and sisters, is the beginning of the Jewish and the Arab conflict. All of it was due to that act of flesh on the part of Abram. When Hagar gave birth, Abram would have been 86 years old. Remember, 11 years had passed since God gave his first promise of an heir to Abraham. And even then, the promise was still not fulfilled. The descendants of the wild man still live among Israel today. And still today, they truly hate one another. This battle is a continuous one. And look at how long this has been going on. Alright, let's look at verse 13 now. It says, and she called the and she called the name of the Lord that spake unto her, Thou God seest me. For she said, Have I also here looked after him that seeth me? It says, Thou seest me. She recognizes that the angel of God, and she's ascribing this name to him. This arose from Hagar's astonishment, because she'd been the object of God's gracious attention. Theophany, revelation, all of this led to her to call him the one who lives and sees me. All right, let's go to verse 14 now. Wherefore the well was called Bir Lahai Roi. Behold, it is between Kadesh and Bered. We see that the well would be called, and I know, you don't have to tell me I'm butchering that word. I'm going to try to say it again. Bir Lahai Roi. So, what do we know? Well, Hagar, she sat down beside this well, or this fountain, whatever you want to call it, and it's in the wilderness of Shur, and it was here that the angel of the Lord found her. And to commemorate it, she names the well Bir Lahel Roy, which means a well for the living, for the living one who seeth me. This implies two things here. Number one, she dedicated that well to the one who appeared to her. And number two, she had faith. She had faith in the promise. You see, the living one who exists in all generations has it in his power to accomplish the promise that will be fulfilled through the whole lapse of time. Hagar, she realized that it was God who provided the well, and that it was God that told her to go back to Sarai. I fully believe that she knew that God did not give her permission to leave. The name that she gave to that well, the well of the living one. You see, as I'm sure you already know, in places like the Middle East, wells are very valuable things. And I know you know this because I repeat it. But wells are very valuable things for people to have. Did you know that the Jewish people, they use the Bible to find old wells? I kid you not. There's a documentary station that I watch on YouTube that deals with the Bible. I think it's called Bible Expedition. Go look it up. Archaeologists still to this day use the Bible to find certain places. All right. Verse 15 now. And Hagar bare Abram a son, and Abram called his son's name, which Hagar bare him, Ishmael. It starts off with, and Hagar bare Abram a son. This makes it sound like Hagar did what God told her to do. She returned. She believed in the promise that God made to her. And when she returned home and she was welcomed back by Abram, she must have reconciled with Sarai. It says that she brought forth a son to Abram, just like the angel said. And then we read, Abram called his son's name, which Hagar bare, Ishmael. Now, I want to discuss something here for a second. Jarkey suggests that Abram got the name by inspiration of the Holy Spirit, which dwelled in him. But let's think about this for a moment. Is it not reasonable to think that Hagar just told Abram what happened with the angel? And Abram, believing what she said, gave his son the name out of obedience to what the angel commanded. Now remember, Ishmael means God will hear. Remember that this was not a son of the promise. This was a son of the flesh. Alright, here we are. Last verse in the chapter. Verse 16, which reads, And Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bare Ishmael to Abram. We already talked about this earlier, but look what the verse says. And Abram was 86 years old when Hagar bare Ishmael to Abram. You can easily come to this. Remember, he was 75 years old when he left Haran, which we can read back in Genesis chapter 12, verse 4. And remember, he had been in Canaan for 10 years when Hagar was given to him by Sarai. This was back in verse 3, which means he's 85 years old. So he would have been 86 when Ishmael was born. So, again, I want to make sure that I say thank you for joining me here. I know I repeat this over and over and over again, but you taking the time to join me here from either BitChute or Rumble or YouTube or over on the podcast. Knowing that you're here means a lot to me. And the fact that you stayed here to the end means even more. You know, some people, they might watch half, they might watch a quarter of it, whatever. But I know there's a few of you who watch all the way to the end. I know Miss Mary does, and I know a few other people who stay right to the end. So thank you all for listening or watching. Again, I want to make sure I say Happy New Year to you. Before I forget, my mother, a few days ago, was bitten on her hand by a dog. They got into her yard, and she has stitches, and she says she messaged me earlier complaining with pain and swelling, and if it would mean a lot to me if you guys would say a quick prayer for her. And if you have me on Facebook, my mother's easy to find. She's listed as my mother in my thing, and you probably see her constantly posting on my wall. Her name's Susan. Message her and just let her know you're praying for her. Let her know you're thinking about her. So yeah. Thank you all for joining me here. I want to again say Happy New Year. I pray the Lord continues to bless you and keep you throughout this new year. And I hope to see you all back here soon. God love you. I love each and every one of you. God bless each and every one of you. Thank you and have a good night.